What if the moments when you doubted yourself the most were actually the very first signs that something far greater had already begun unfolding within you? What if that constant feeling of not belonging, of seeing the world differently from everyone else, wasn't a flaw that needed to be fixed, but a quiet calling you simply haven't learned to recognize yet? Maybe you found this video because something has changed. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, almost imperceptible process. Conversations that once fascinated you began to feel empty. The goals that once gave meaning to your daily life lost their spark. The people you love are still by your side, yet for some reason, you no longer feel connected to them in the same way. It's as if an invisible distance has formed between you and the rest of the world. Most people call this an existential crisis. They say it's just a phase, overthinking, or emotional exhaustion. But what if that explanation is incomplete? What if what you perceive as confusion is actually the beginning of a spiritual awakening? Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychiatrists and psychotherapists in history, believed that life's most difficult moments often conceal profound meaning. To him, true transformation doesn't begin when everything is going well. It begins when the identity you've built is no longer strong enough to support who you truly are. That's when the unconscious begins to speak more loudly. The fascinating part is that it rarely communicates directly. Instead, it sends signs, symbols, intense emotions, vivid dreams, and a strange feeling that something deep within you is trying to awaken. The problem is that almost no one recognizes these signs when they first appear. Quite the opposite. Most people fight against them. They try to go back to who they used to be. They try to reclaim a life that no longer feels meaningful. And the more they resist, the stronger the feelings of emptiness, anxiety, and disconnection become. Maybe you've experienced exactly that. Maybe you've wondered why, even though you're doing everything you've always done, nothing seems capable of filling the space that has opened inside you. There is a reason for this. According to Jung, there is a profound difference between living according to the image we present to the world and living according to who we truly are. For years, we've learned to wear masks so we can be accepted, admired, and loved. But eventually, those masks begin to crack. Not because you've failed, but because they can no longer conceal the person trying to emerge from your unconscious. And it is precisely at that moment that many people believe they are losing control, when in reality, they may be beginning the most important journey of their lives. A journey that doesn't happen by accident and leaves behind very specific signs so subtle that most people overlook them, yet once understood, they completely transform the way you interpret your own life story. The biggest surprise is that these signs don't appear the way you might expect. They don't arrive as extraordinary mystical experiences or instant answers. They begin much more quietly, hidden within behaviors, emotions, and inner changes that almost no one knows how to interpret. And the very first sign is often the one that frightens people the most. Before we continue, I'd like to invite you to do something. If, at any point during this introduction, you felt like I was describing something happening inside you, take a moment to like this video. That simple gesture helps this message reach others who are going through the same experience but still believe they're completely alone. You never know when a single message might reach exactly the person who needs to hear it most. And I'd love to hear about your experience. Leave a comment saying, "I felt the call." Or, if you prefer, tell us in your own words about the first moment you realized something inside you had changed, even though you couldn't explain why. I read many of the comments, and one of the most remarkable things about this community is seeing how so many different life stories reveal surprisingly similar signs. By sharing your experience, you may help someone else realize that what they're feeling is also part of a journey of transformation. And if topics like depth psychology, self-discovery, spiritual awakening, and the teachings of Carl Jung spark your curiosity, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every video here is designed to uncover what usually remains hidden in the unconscious, helping you better understand yourself and see your life from an entirely new perspective. Because what you're about to discover may explain experiences that, for years, seemed completely disconnected. And the most intriguing part is that the very first sign of spiritual awakening is often the one almost everyone mistakes for a problem, when in reality, it may be the clearest evidence that a profound transformation has already begun within you. There comes a moment in life when everything that once made perfect sense simply stops working. You wake up, follow your routine, talk to the same people, visit the same places, yet something deep inside keeps telling you there's a gap between who you appear to be and who you truly are. This is one of the quietest signs of a spiritual awakening, precisely because it doesn't arrive with answers, it arrives with questions. Questions that unsettle you. Questions that keep you awake at night. Questions that make you look at your own life and ask yourself, how did I end up here? Maybe you've tried to ignore this feeling, convincing yourself it was just a phase. After all, we live in a world that teaches us to keep moving without questioning, to fill every emptiness with distractions, and to mistake constant activity for genuine purpose. But the unconscious doesn't disappear simply because it's ignored. As Carl Jung famously said, what you resist, persists. And perhaps that's exactly why the harder you've tried to become the person you used to be, the more you've realized that you simply can't. Jung believed that every human being constructs a persona, a mask that is necessary for functioning in society. From an early age, we learn which emotions we should hide, which dreams are considered acceptable, and which parts of ourselves must remain concealed if we want to be loved and accepted. Over time, that mask stops feeling like a role we play and begins to feel like our true identity. The problem is that the soul refuses to stay hidden forever. Eventually, it begins sending signals that something far greater is waiting to emerge. And those signals are rarely comfortable. They appear as a sense of emptiness even when everything seems to be going well, as a kind of exhaustion that no amount of rest can cure, or as the unsettling feeling that you're living someone else's life. It is during this stage that many people believe they are failing. They look at themselves and assume they've lost their motivation, when in reality, they may simply be losing their attachment to a version of themselves that no longer reflects who they truly are. Spiritual awakening almost never begins with light. It begins when illusions lose their power to convince you. And that can be frightening, because it means letting go of certainties that once seemed unquestionable. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens." At first glance, those words seem simple, but they carry a profound truth. As long as we search for answers only in the outside world, we remain trapped by other people's expectations. True self-discovery begins when we find the courage to look within, even knowing we'll encounter fears, doubts, and the parts of ourselves we've spent a lifetime avoiding. Perhaps you've noticed that certain friendships no longer bring you the same joy. Maybe you've realized that superficial conversations have become more draining than they used to be. Or perhaps you've experienced those strange moments of silence, when you'd rather be alone because something inside you is asking to be heard. That doesn't mean you've become cold, arrogant, or antisocial. In many cases, it simply means your awareness has begun to see beyond appearances. And once that happens, it's impossible to go back to living exactly as you did before, because once your perception expands, it never returns to its original size. It is at this point that the process begins to reveal an even more fascinating dimension, something very few people recognize while it's happening, yet something Carl Jung considered one of the most remarkable expressions of inner transformation. In the next section, we're going to explore that very phenomenon. If this reflection describes something you've already experienced, leave a comment saying, "My consciousness has awakened." I want to know how many people have made it this far recognizing these signs within themselves. And if this message resonates with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey of self-discovery and depth psychology together. As this inner transformation begins to unfold, something curious also starts happening in your life, events that seem too small to deserve your attention, yet too meaningful to ignore. You think about someone you haven't seen in years, and they message you that very same day. You randomly open a book and find exactly the sentence you needed to read. You keep hearing the same idea in completely different places, as though life itself were insisting on showing you a path you're still resisting. To many people, these are nothing more than coincidences. But Carl Jung spent decades observing this phenomenon and gave it a name that would become one of the most fascinating concepts in depth psychology: synchronicity. According to Jung, there are moments when external events and inner processes become meaningfully connected, even though no cause and effect relationship exists between them. It's not that the universe is sending magical messages. Rather, your awareness begins recognizing patterns that once went unnoticed. Spiritual awakening expands your perception, allowing what has always been right in front of you to finally make sense. It's like adjusting the focus on a camera. The scene hasn't changed, but now you can see details that were invisible before. Perhaps that's why so many people describe this phase as a period of heightened sensitivity. You begin to sense the energy of different environments. You can tell when a conversation isn't genuine. You recognize hidden intentions behind kind words. And you start trusting an intuition you used to ignore. For a long time, you may have dismissed these experiences as overreacting or simply having an overactive imagination. Yet Jung believed that the unconscious possesses its own intelligence and finds symbolic ways to guide the conscious mind once we're ready to listen. One of his most powerful quotes captures this process perfectly: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Take a moment to reflect on the depth of that idea. How many decisions did you believe were completely rational when they were actually shaped by fears, emotional wounds, and unconscious patterns you had never examined? How many times did you repeat the same kind of relationship, face the same conflicts, or find yourself trapped in the same cycles without understanding why? Spiritual awakening doesn't immediately erase those patterns. Instead, it does something even more powerful: it reveals them. And once something has been brought into the light, it can no longer rule your life in the same way. It is precisely at this stage that many people begin having more vivid dreams, noticing recurring symbols, and experiencing a persistent feeling that a silent dialogue is taking place between the outer world and the inner one. The unconscious speaks through images, metaphors, and emotions. It doesn't shout, it whispers. The problem is that we've been taught to trust only logic and to be suspicious of anything that cannot be explained immediately. As a result, we ignore signs that could completely transform our understanding of who we truly are. But there's one detail that makes this process even more challenging. The more you awaken to these signs, the more a part of your mind tries to convince you that it's all just your imagination. It's as though two opposing forces begin to coexist within you: one that longs to remain safely inside the familiar, and another that feels, with growing intensity, that it can no longer fall asleep to its own truth. And it is within this silent conflict that the greatest obstacle emerges, one faced by nearly everyone who begins a genuine journey of self-discovery. If you've ever experienced events that seemed like coincidences but deeply touched your awareness, leave the word synchronicity in the comments. Your experience may help someone else recognize the signs in their own life. And if this message is expanding the way you see yourself and the world, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the teachings of Carl Jung and the path of spiritual awakening together. The most fascinating part is that the greatest challenge of spiritual awakening isn't found in the events happening around you, but in the silent battle taking place within your own mind. It's as if one part of you knows with absolute certainty that something is changing, while another desperately tries to keep everything exactly the way it has always been. This inner conflict is not a sign of weakness. Quite the opposite. For Carl Jung, it represents one of the most significant stages of the individuation process, the journey toward becoming who you truly are. The ego has a natural tendency to protect whatever feels familiar. Even when a situation causes suffering, it still provides a sense of control. The unknown, on the other hand, awakens fear. That's why so many people spend years in empty relationships, meaningless jobs, or lifestyles that drain their energy. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because familiar suffering feels less frightening than transformation. Spiritual awakening begins the moment that logic stops working. You realize that continuing to live the way you always have has become more painful than changing. It is at this point that you inevitably come face to face with what Jung called the shadow. You may have heard that term before, but very few people truly understand its depth. The shadow is not simply the dark side of your personality. It contains everything we've learned to hide: our fears, insecurities, repressed desires, resentments, forgotten talents, and even the brightest parts of ourselves that we've never dared to express. For years, we've pushed these aspects into the unconscious because we believed they would make us less lovable or less acceptable. But the unconscious never destroys what we repress. It simply waits for the right moment to bring it all back into awareness. That is why, during a genuine journey of self-discovery, old emotions can resurface with unexpected intensity. Wounds you thought had already healed rise back to the surface. Childhood memories take on entirely new meaning. Seemingly insignificant situations trigger reactions that feel far greater than the moment itself. Many people interpret this as a setback when, in reality, it may be one of the clearest signs of inner growth. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That statement challenges one of the greatest misconceptions about spiritual awakening. It doesn't happen because you eliminate your pain. It happens because you finally choose to face it instead of running from it. And perhaps that's exactly what you're experiencing right now. Maybe life has begun revealing wounds you believed had completely healed. Maybe you're questioning old decisions, recognizing recurring patterns, or becoming aware of behaviors that once seemed perfectly normal. It may be uncomfortable, but it also represents a rare opportunity. After all, no one can transform what they refuse to see. The more self-aware you become, the less room there is to live on autopilot. What's fascinating is that as this process unfolds, something unexpected begins to happen. You start noticing changes not only within yourself, but also in the way other people respond to your presence. Some drift away without explanation. Others seem to appear at exactly the moment you need them most. Certain relationships grow stronger, while others simply stop making sense. Not because you've intentionally changed, but because your energy, your choices, and your level of awareness are no longer operating on the same frequency they once were. And there is a deeply profound psychological reason for this, one that Jung considered essential to understanding why every major inner transformation inevitably changes the world around us as well. If this part of the video helped you recognize an inner struggle you've been experiencing, leave a comment saying, "I choose to face my shadow." That small commitment to yourself could mark the beginning of an entirely new way of seeing your own journey. And if this message is inspiring meaningful reflection, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel as we continue exploring the path of self-discovery through the psychology of Carl Jung. When your awareness begins to change, the world around you seems to change along with it. In reality, what changes first is the way you see other people, your circumstances, and most importantly, yourself. That is why one of the most revealing hidden signs of spiritual awakening is realizing that certain relationships no longer fit naturally into your life. People who once seemed indispensable begin to feel distant. Places that once brought you comfort begin to leave you feeling strangely drained. Not because those people or places have necessarily changed, but because you are no longer the same person who walked into them months or years ago. Carl Jung believed that every inner transformation inevitably changes the way we relate to the world. As consciousness expands, it stops automatically accepting what once seemed normal. You begin noticing subtle manipulation, repetitive emotional patterns, and relationships built solely on the need for approval. What was once invisible becomes impossible to ignore. And this awakening can be uncomfortable because it requires admitting that part of your life was built to satisfy external expectations rather than the deepest voice of your own authentic self. Perhaps you felt this without ever finding the words to describe it. You find yourself in a conversation and realize you can no longer pretend to be interested just to please someone else. You hear opinions you once accepted without question, and suddenly you feel the need to pause and think before agreeing. Small gestures begin revealing intentions that previously escaped your attention. It's not that you've become suspicious. It's that your perception has become more refined. Self-discovery expands your ability to see beyond appearances, and that completely transforms the way you experience life. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It sounds like a simple statement, yet it challenges almost everything we've been taught since childhood. We were taught to pursue recognition, status, approval, and belonging. Rarely were we encouraged to discover our authentic identity. Spiritual awakening turns that logic upside down. It makes you realize that you were never born to play a role for your entire life. You were born to become your true self, even if that means disappointing a few expectations along the way. And there is an almost inevitable consequence when this happens: you begin to experience a different kind of peace when you're alone. Not because you've stopped loving other people, but because you're finally learning to enjoy your own company. Silence no longer feels empty. Instead, it becomes the place where you can hear your own thoughts with clarity. Many of the answers you desperately searched for in the outside world begin to emerge during moments of quiet reflection. It's as if, for the very first time, you realize that the voice you've been searching for was never outside you. But this new awareness also demands courage. Because the more awake you become, the less willing you are to accept a life built on illusions. You begin recognizing when you're betraying your own values, when you're saying yes simply out of fear of rejection, or when you're hiding your true nature to avoid conflict. That clarity is deeply liberating, but it also requires difficult choices. And it is precisely at this point that many people discover that spiritual awakening is not merely an experience of heightened awareness. It is an invitation to transform your actions, break old cycles, and rebuild your identity in a way that very few people have the courage to embrace. There is, however, one final sign that brings all the others together and reveals, almost beyond question, that the process of transformation is already underway. It is a quiet, profound, and unmistakable sign, the one Carl Jung associated with the true path of individuation, a sign capable of completely transforming the way you understand your own existence. If you've realized that you can no longer live simply to meet other people's expectations, leave a comment saying, "I choose to be who I truly am." That commitment could become a defining milestone on your journey of spiritual awakening. And if this video is bringing clarity to questions you've never been able to explain, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can continue walking this path with us, a journey of self-discovery, depth psychology, and inner transformation. Perhaps, after hearing all of this, you're asking yourself how you can know whether your spiritual awakening has truly begun, or whether it's all just a story your mind is telling you. That's a perfectly natural question. After all, the unconscious doesn't reveal itself in obvious ways. But there is one sign that encompasses all the others, a sign Carl Jung saw as the deepest expression of human transformation, the beginning of the process of individuation. For Jung, individuation does not mean becoming perfect. It means becoming whole. It is the moment when you stop living solely through the identity you created to please the world and begin, little by little, to integrate every part of who you truly are. This process changes something incredibly subtle, yet profoundly powerful. You stop desperately searching for answers everywhere. Not because you suddenly know everything, but because you learn to trust your own inner wisdom. The fear of disappointing others begins to lose its grip. The need to constantly prove your worth starts to fade. Comparisons no longer consume your energy. Gradually, you realize that your inner peace is worth far more than the approval of people who never truly saw your authentic self. That doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. In fact, some challenges may even seem greater than before. The difference is that you no longer respond to them in the same way. What once filled you with despair now invites reflection. What once felt like punishment becomes an opportunity for inner growth. You begin to truly understand another of Jung's most memorable insights: I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. When those words stop being just an inspiring quote and begin guiding your decisions, something deeply transformative happens. You realize that your life no longer has to be defined by the wounds of your past. It is at this stage that many people describe a feeling that's difficult to put into words. It isn't constant happiness, nor is it a permanent state of peace. It's something much deeper, a quiet certainty that there is meaning behind everything they have experienced. Even painful moments begin to take on new significance. Not because suffering was inherently necessary, but because it revealed strengths, abilities, and parts of their character that might never have emerged any other way. Spiritual awakening doesn't erase your story. It changes the way you understand it. And perhaps that is the greatest sign of all. You stop asking only, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin asking, "What was this experience trying to awaken within me?" That shift may seem small, but it completely transforms the way you face life. Instead of remaining trapped in the role of a victim of circumstance, you take responsibility for your own growth. It is precisely there that a strength is born, a strength that doesn't depend on other people's opinions, perfect circumstances, or the absence of hardship. It is born from the integration of awareness, self-knowledge, and the courage to live according to your truth. If you've made it this far, perhaps you've realized that many of the signs we've explored throughout this video are not isolated coincidences, but different expressions of the same unfolding process. A process that continues even when no one around you can fully understand it. And perhaps there's a reason you came across this message at this exact moment. Maybe this isn't the end of your search, but the beginning of a much deeper journey, one where every new discovery about yourself opens the door to even greater questions, questions capable of transforming not only the way you see the world, but also the way the world begins to respond to the person you are becoming. If this video awakened something within you, leave a comment saying, "My journey has begun." That simple declaration could represent the first conscious step in your transformation. And if you'd like to continue exploring the teachings of Carl Jung, self-discovery, and spiritual awakening, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the upcoming content designed to take this journey even deeper. Here's a powerful, emotional closing designed to maximize audience retention, engagement, and clicks to the next video. If you've stayed with me until this moment, I'd like you to pause for just a few seconds and ask yourself one honest question. Was this just another video, or did some of these words describe something that has been quietly happening inside you for a very long time? If this message sparked a reflection, gave you answers you've been searching for, or simply made you feel understood, subscribe to the channel today. This space was created for people who want to go beyond the surface, understand the human mind, explore the teachings of Carl Jung, and deepen their journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. With every new video, you'll discover insights that help you see what most people spend their entire lives overlooking. I'd also love to hear your story. Leave a comment saying, "This message reflects exactly how I feel." Or, if you prefer, tell us which of the signs discussed today resonated with you the most. Your experience may help someone else who is going through the very same process but hasn't yet found the words to describe what they're feeling. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like. That simple action tells YouTube that this message deserves to reach more people who may need to hear it right now. And share this video with someone you believe is going through an inner transformation. Sometimes, a single message arrives at exactly the right moment and completely changes the way someone sees their own life. And don't stop here. The next video has been carefully chosen to build on everything we've explored today. In it, you'll discover another powerful aspect of Carl Jung's depth psychology that may explain why certain events keep repeating in your life, and how they're directly connected to your own process of transformation. Click on the next video that's now appearing on your screen and continue this journey. The answer to the next question waiting inside you may be right there.